Hello and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge, and joining me today, I have a Wheeler and a Jer.
Hello, yes, I am Jer.
A reminder that North 100 is brought to you by you with your support over the Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Welcome to part 2 of our Zendikar Rising set review. Now, some important and exciting news to talk about before we get into the episode. Exciting news number 1, we have a brand new editor named Jordan, also known as Sickly on Twitter. Very excited to be working with her. And down in the comments, I'd love to see some positivity welcoming our new editor. And exciting announcement number 2, due to popular demand, we're now going to allow Jer to not be covered by the card preview. Ooh, how do you feel, Jer?
I'm free!
More seriously, apologies to Jer. There was a technical error that we noticed a little bit too late in the whole process right now, and apologies there. All right, welcome to part 2 of our Zendikar Rising set review. Today we're going to be covering black and red. That's right, this is going to be a 3-part set review, as there are a lot of cards that we are excited to talk about. A reminder for our set reviews, this is not exhaustive. We are not going to be talking about every single card in the set, just the ones that we think are relevant to the format. And all the cards are going to be evaluated from a Canadian Highlander point of view. If it's good in Modern, if it's good as a 4 of, doesn't matter. We only care about it in our very specific lens. Let's jump into it. Starting off, we have Acquisitions Expert. 2 mana, 1/2 human rogue for 1 and a black. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals a number of cards in their hand equal to the number of creatures in your party. You choose one of those cards and they discard it. This is a harder one to evaluate. What do you two think?
I think it goes in a pretty specific deck, and it's good in that deck, and it's probably not going to be used much outside of that deck.
Like, do people even play Blackmail anymore? Because Blackmail is a 1 mana sorcery.
Well, you're playing this in like Rotting Rats, Ravenous Rats.
Yeah, like this is an ability. I mean, Blackmail at the same time, but also like this is on a body, which anytime you have discard on a body, it at least is worth looking at. Like Ravenous Rats is only the kind of card you would see in like a really like Jared says, right? Like density based, where I think this is, if you want another thing that makes people discard, glad of it. It does hit lands, which is nice. Like even if if you have a couple of things in your party, which you probably will, you can maybe peek at their lands, much like Blackmail.
When it doesn't give them an out to just like show you lands and then get to keep everything.
I guess it is a better rat, as it's a 1/2 instead of a 1/1. And really quickly, just so we touch on it this episode, how relevant do you think party is going to be in our format?
I think party, I was in the camp that I'm pretty sure that if you are playing party cards, like most of them are creatures, like at least most of the ones that we're talking about, where party is like a big feature of it. I think that you kind of just have to assume that you're going to have party at 2 pretty frequently. And after playing with party, obviously in formats with multiples, I feel like that's pretty kind of close to what it's going to be. Like, I guess even playing it in Commander has felt like, oh yeah, this mechanic's great.
Yeah, like I'm gonna have 1, maybe 2.
Yeah, exactly what you said. One or 2 on average. That would be the odd time where you have 3. And I think 4 is going to be pretty few and far between.
Yeah, don't ever see that happening, but 2 or 3.
Well, then let's move on to our next card, Agadeem's Awakening. X, black sorcery. Return from your graveyard to the battlefield any number of target creature cards that each have a different converter mana cost of X or less. But wait, this is a double-faced modal card. On the other side is a black source that enters play untapped if you pay 3 life. Wheeler, what do you think?
I think this card might actually be one of my favorite cards of the set, like top 3 for sure. It's, again, very free in the sense that if you look at all of the decks that play black, like you can think mono black because of the heavy pip requirement, but even black X decks, like
I think this is insane in like my version of the rock, like the creature version of the rock. It's absurd in that deck.
Because, like, no matter what your build is, if you are a deck that can justify the cost of this, like, on the front side, then you don't care as much about the downside. Like, again, and then there's always just the option comes into play tapped. But, like, black decks can often, want to deal damage to themselves as well. Yeah, this card's absurd. Like I had to reread it a couple of times because I thought it was just kind of like a gruesome menagerie style of effect where you pick one, you know, a 1 cost thing, a 2 cost thing, sort of thing. But like, no, it's all any number of target cards below the X that have different mana costs, obviously. But like,
So it is sort of gruesome menagerie.
for sure, yeah. I thought it was like an exact port, but no, there's more flexibility with this.
Really, really quickly, talk about that flexibility just in case people don't know what the difference is.
Sure. So Gruesome Menagerie is a 5-mana sorcery that says you can return a 3-drop, a 2-drop, and a 1-drop from your graveyard. And the way that this works is that obviously you can go larger, right? Like it's not as locked into saying here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, and that's it. You could pull a 5-drop and a 1-drop, right? That's a lot of mana, but as Jared described, playing this in like a black-green creature-based deck that will, you know, probably have Sakura Tribe Elder, Courser of Crufix, that kind of stuff. You can bring back your little Dorcases, but you can also start pulling like really relevant cards out of the grave.
Like getting back a Thragtusk or something. Custody Lich.
Yeah, and like usually these kind of spells get like capped on like the fact that you're only getting 3. Like there's a card from Ikoria that did something similar to this, Hall of the Death Dwelling, I want to say it was
Called the Death Dweller.
Yeah, I was hopeful for that card, but then it was just like, oh, I got goozled again.
So this is Gruesome Menagerie, but with more flexibility.
Well, and it's a land, which is an absurd amount more like we can't possibly overstate how much more flexibility this card has than.
So at 5, so if X is equal to 2 on Awakening, you can only bring back 2 creatures. Gruesome Menagerie is going to get you 3. Well, you could bring back a 0-drop. You're correct there. But I suppose as the game goes longer, you just have more and more upside with this. It's not a weird, different, unique CMC. So you can't bring back a creature with a 1 black pip versus a 1 generic pip and call those 2 different ones. So it's still 1 creature.
Yeah, they're not different mana costs. They're different converted mana costs.
Yeah. Just double checking that to make sure we're not giving people the wrong impression there. Neat.
Also, like, nostalgia point, does anyone miss Death Cloud?
Every day.
Oh god, yeah. X black. Every time I see that, I shed 1 single tear.
And I'm just looking at the art, and like, art aside, that could almost be a Death Cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe, you know what, maybe they're like, let's put Death Cloud into this, and the artist was like, finally, and they're like, oh wait, psych.
Death Cloud is the number 1 card I think I would like to see added to Historic. Like it won't be great, but it would be Death Cloud.
But it'd be there.
It.
Yeah, well, I'll cast it.
It won't be good, but I'll cast it.
All right, let's move on to Blood Chief's Thirst. And this is like a flavor callback to old Zendikar here. Anyways, 1 mana sorcery for single black with kicker for 2 and a black. Destroy target creature or planeswalker with a CMC of 2 or less. If the spell was kicked, instead destroy target creature or planeswalker. Jer.
I actually really like this card, even though it's a sorcery. I still think it's going to be good enough. Just the fact that you have another really cheap black removal spell that can take out the early drop creatures, even the ones that can get bigger. Like being able to draw this late game and take out a Tarmogoyf for a Scavenging Ooze that's getting out of control just for 1 mana, and the ability to kill anything later. The fact that it tags planeswalkers is what makes it playable. But yeah, I think it's just a great card. It's like either efficient or versatile. So
back in my day, if you wanted a good removal spell for a black and a sorcery, you had to play Innocent Blood.
Oh.
Speaking of Death Cloud, makes me think of old Pox cards.
Mm.
All right, let's move on to Coveted Prize. 5 mana sorcery for 4 and a black, but this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. Search your library for a card, put it into your hand, shuffle your library. If you have a full party, you may cast a spell with CMC 4 or less from your hand for free. Here we have another party card, and this time actually having a clause for a full party. I mean, we talked a little bit about this earlier on you're never going to have a full party. How much are you willing to spend for a demonic tutor here?
I think if you're in a pretty heavy black creature deck that like will somewhat reliably have 2 out of the party, you could play it. But I'm not really in the market for a really expensive DT. Like, lots of those decks aren't even playing Dark Petition, which is almost certainly better than this a large portion of the time.
It's just too many hoops to get it to be really good, or even to like the mana where it's cheap enough to rival the other, cheaper tutors, but like, I don't know, if you're like a black deck that can get this down to like 2 mana or 3 mana, then, which is not super, unlikely, I guess, for a black creature deck, but like, you just have better options that are already just cheaper up front. Always they come, they'll come paired with a downside, right? Like, unless you're playing a demonic tutor, but obviously that's 4 points. But like, yeah, I just struggle to see where these worlds will collide, especially because there are already better options that don't see much play.
I want to talk about your points conversation there, though. Is there a chance that you're trying to be cheeky on your points, and this is a sometimes demonic tutor, sometimes slightly worse, but 0 points?
Well, just as Ben mentioned, it's like there's already better options that are 0 points that don't see as much play. So it's like too far down the pecking order, I think, most often, unless you're like literally playing every possible demonic tutor you can find.
Not to mention, like, if you are, because we've mostly been discussing this within the realm of a mono black deck, but even if you're a black X aggressive deck, like a lot of those decks still just use demonic tutor in their point spread. Like, there's only so many pointed cards that those decks want or really need. Like, they're not the kind of decks that draw strength beyond like Mox Jet, right? Or like maybe a mana crypt or so.
That's fair.
But yeah, I would just rather not play this card.
Well, and often in the black decks, mana crypt and soul ring aren't even, like, they're good, but they're not that good because of how pip hungry black cards are.
Exactly. That's why I say it's just like Mox Jet, and might as well throw a Black Lotus in there, or Mox Jet Demonic Tutor Strip. Like, that's a pretty common spread to see.
All right, next up we have Demon's Disciple. 3 mana, 3/1 human cleric for 2 and a black. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacks a creature or planeswalker. Wheeler.
It's nice to get a medium kind of version of this card. There's Fleshbag Marauder. Sorry, I tripped up on my words because I'm about to describe that. It's incredibly disgusting. Like, the art on that card is absolutely disgusting. It's the same effect, except it's a zombie as opposed to a human cleric here. And then there's a version from Fate Reforged that has really cool art.
Merciless Executioner.
Yeah, exactly. Merciless Executioner. So if you're looking for redundancy in these effects, which, I mean, maybe a mono black mid-range, a mono black, mono black Dredge or mono black Reanimator, like the Reanimator Stompy-ish decks.
Also notably, this hits Planeswalkers, which I think only Plaguecrafter
does, yeah. Like, this has some utility to it for sure, but I think much like, Acquisitions Expert in a way, is that this is the kind of card that you'd only really see if you're really looking to pile on density. Because if you just want this kind of effect, I'd play...
Yeah, Plaguecrafter's the better.
Yeah, exactly. Just play Plaguecrafter. But if you want more, then you get to dip into these.
Yeah, this is the next best one now, because it also says Planeswalker that the other ones
don't. Well, the zombie text on Marauder or Fleshbag Marauder can be somewhat relevant.
Yeah, this is a human, though, which you could argue is like almost as relevant, probably. So.
Right.
But
then we get, this is not the card to spend a bunch of nuanced discussion on, like, which tribal deck really needs to get to these tools.
I like it. We have a note on this one being like, probably not a lot to talk about. And all of a sudden you're like, which is the superior tribe? I'm like, gentlemen, this is not the time. You're like, no. All right.
Classic humans versus zombies.
Next up, Drana got swole. So Drana is now back as the last Blood Chief. 5 mana, 4/4 legendary vampire cleric for 3 black. She has flying. She's lost first strike, but has, whenever Drana the last Blood Chief attacks, defending player chooses a non-legendary creature card in your graveyard. Return that card to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. And it's now a vampire in addition to its other types. Jer.
Yeah, I think this card's Sweet design. The immediate home I thought of for it was like the black-green creature rock deck, where you're looking to like fuel your bin with survival of the fittest, and you have a bunch of expendable early creatures that all have utility, so you don't mind if they come back again later. Yeah, I think this card's pretty reasonable. I'd look to try it out. It does have the sort of limiting factor that it's a 5-drop that doesn't do anything when it enters. You have to untap with it, but it does have the clause of if you untap with it, it does really good things and you're probably going to win. Yeah, I could see playing it. I could also see it not being good enough.
Next up, we have Feed the Swarm. 2-mana sorcery, 1 and a black. Destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's CMC. Black has enchantment hate. Jer, what do you think?
I mean, it's probably not good enough for Highlander unless you're in a weird meta where you're in mono black and you really need to destroy enchantments. Like, I think most of the time you're just better off playing white or green and getting access to better cards that do the same thing.
Yeah, I could maybe see this in like a very like self-contained, honestly, in like a quarantine meta game. Like if you're playing with like the same kind of group of people and you're playing mono black and somebody just brings Enchantress and you're like, oh god.
You're like, finally, my moment has come. And they're like, dog.
Yeah.
They just like keep tutoring for elephant grass.
Oh, like,
we've been telling you to splash green for years. No, I will die on the hill of mono black.
I think the way that I've described this card to people is like, I wouldn't tell people to play it in their deck, but if somebody played this against me, I wouldn't be like, oh god, we need to have a talk sort of thing, right? It would just be like, yep, well, killed my thing.
Yeah, you got me.
It's just like a removal spell, but
some decks where the life loss is a positive as well. Like,
yeah,
more and more Death Shadow-esque cards.
All right. Next up, Hagra Constrictor, 3-mana 0/0 for 2 and a black, but it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. It's a snake. I didn't mention that. That's kind of relevant. And each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has menace. Wheeler, what do you think?
I can't stress how good menace is. Like, I hope enough people have been taking beats from like Labyrinth Raptor, from Ikoria, and the various menace cards that have been put out, because they seem to be printing a lot of them. Like, there's a lot more creatures that just have menace attached to it, which is kind of nice in a world of board-based hell. Like, menace just ends games, right? Like, this just comes down. It's a 3-drop for the counters deck. I'm speaking especially about the counters decks. It's a 3-drop that's easy on your colors, which is nice. Getting to 3 is not that bad in a decks that usually use their points for Moxin and typically will play Mana Dorks. The fact that it has counters itself, always a benefit. That's kind of like a mandatory thing for these kind of cards. And like, you just play this immediately, your board is just, what are they going to do? Right? Like, menace in a lot of cases could just be unblockable. Yeah, it's so I really like this card. I thought of this card as kind of like a Mogus's Marauder for the counters decks, which is a card that people that play mono black are very familiar with, or people that have died to mono black are very familiar with.
I'm in the latter camp, but
yeah.
All right, let's move on to Hagra Mauling. 4-mana instant for 2 black. Destroy target creature, but the spell costs 1 less to cast if the opponent controls no basic lands. And on the other side, a black source that enters play tapped, Hagra Brood Pit. Jer, what do you think?
it's a great 3-mana removal spell that has the upside of also being a land. Yeah, I think it's great.
Can I just point out how I agree with Jer, but I gotta say, that is the funniest line of text I've seen on a Magic card. It's just like, the spell costs 1 less to cast if an opponent controls no basic lands.
And it has like very little to do with lands whatsoever. And then it's like destroy target creature. You're like, huh.
Yeah.
Like, all right, I guess.
I mean, I'll
take it.
I'll take it. Why is this happening? And they give no explanation. Yeah.
Like, not they don't have lands, therefore they get punished.
Yeah, You know what it reminds me of like like going to like a mattress store. This is something that has happened and may have happened to the other two gentlemen in this call that have lived in Victoria, BC. Going to like a mattress store, department store, and there's like a popcorn stand up front. Like at the doors that give you just like a bag of popcorn.
You're like, I'm here for a bed, but I'll eat popcorn. I like popcorn.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, I don't know why you're doing this. You don't have any like charity signs or donation bins or anything. You give me no explanation, but I'm okay with it.
I like it. These two things are not related, but I like both of them.
Yeah, all right.
Oh, wow.
Sure.
All right. I love that. I love that. Next up, let's talk about Inscription of Rune. 3 mana sorcery for 2 and a black. Kicker, 2 black. So your options are pay 3 mana or pay 7 mana. Choose one. Target opponent discards 2 cards. Return target creature card with CMC 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. Or destroy target creature with CMC 3 or less. But if it was kicked, choose any number. Jer.
I'm of the view that I think all these modes are just like a little too underwhelming for this card to see a lot of play. Like I could see some decks, like bigger mana decks, maybe trying to jam it in that it's like somewhat reasonable early, but they're mostly planning to just get all the modes most of the time. Most decks can't do that. And I think these modes are just a little too limiting for it to be like a sort of staple.
I would have liked a little bit of wiggle room, you know, just like one. I mean, it's classic Magic player just asking for more, but it doesn't have to be that much more, you know.
I think even if you bumped the return target creature from 2 to 3, it would make the card quite a bit better. Like then I think we're talking. But
yeah, I'd be a big fan, but too expensive. Little narrow.
Mostly pass on this one.
All right. Next up, Lithoform Blight. Litho or Litho?
Litho.
Lithoform Blight. First try. 2 mana aura for 1 and a black. Enchant land. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Enchanted land loses all land types and abilities and has tap 1 to add a colorless, or tap and pay a life, add 1 mana of any color. This is very exciting. Black has Spreading Seas, but kind of different.
No.
Am I wrong?
Yeah.
I mean, no, go ahead and, I mean, you can.
So Spreading Seas, hold on. Spreading Seas, 1 and a blue, enchanted land. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Enchanted land is an island. So I look at this as sort of two ways. One, I mean, Spreading Seas was an interesting card that saw play as a way to shut off value lands that your opponent controlled. Also, to enable Island Walk on your board to sort of swing in case you're playing not against a blue deck. Do you agree on my assessment of Spreading Seas?
Well, I think you're missing a common case as well, where you just try to like get your opponent off a color.
Well, I was going to get there. Yeah, like Spreading Seas as a hate card or as something you can play in your own deck if you're in something like Enchantress, but that's another niche thing. So Lithoform Blight loses the ability that Spreading Seas had as a way to cut a color, right? Because it took away a land, it gave them a blue, which might not be useful. This doesn't quite have that, but it does shut down Academy.
Yeah.
That is nice.
Yeah.
It's also just an aura that says draw a card, which, like, as an Enchantress player, excites me.
Slam dunk an Enchantress. So I'm with you there.
Not being able to fully, like, I'm pretty happy if I put this on their Cradle or on their Academy, but, like...
I could see it maybe if you have a bunch of Academy decks and once again you're playing a mono black deck or maybe even black green and you don't want to get into like Sinkhole and Ice Storm and stuff like that.
yeah. Just play Sinkhole or Ice Storm, forehead.
But like black decks typically don't care about Cradle. They'll just kill all the creatures. That's seems much easier.
I feel like this just falls into the camp of if somebody plays it against me, I'm not going to be like, oh my god, this is, well, I mean, obviously don't do this for the sake of don't be a jerk, but I'm not going to internally be like screaming about how somebody cast a Lithoform Blight against me. But at the same time, I don't know if I could recommend anybody play this in good faith.
Yeah.
Outside of a deck that just sees enchantment, 2 mana or less, draw a card, sign me up.
Sold.
Yeah.
If maybe it only tapped for colorless, like that pay a life, are they hoping that people would use this in limited to?
Yeah, giving them like a better mana confluence.
Also, I'm just looking at this, thinking about somebody hitting my like academy when I'm on Paradox or something, and thinking like, oh, sick! Now I can cast my Wheel of Fortune. Like, that's kind of funny. Just
or
like
you do it to somebody and like then they just like cast Reality Smasher off the colorless source you just gave them.
Is the goal to fix your own mana base?
No.
I mean, you could do that theoretically for Enchantress, but
I mean, it's a mode of the card, but
Like limited players are here pulling their hair out, being like, "It's just a draft uncommon to fix your mana base," and we're
this card reads like a plant. Like it was put in here to cause, like, to distract people. Like there's going to be like a lithiform blight conspiracy theory about how this card is just here so that we talk about it for 20 hours. And it's just like, I guess we won't play it.
I don't understand.
Who are you for?
It's
Why
like
are
that
you here?
blue rare we talked about. That's also a 2-mana enchantment that sort of messes with lands that draws a card.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that card is just phenomenal in commander groups where you're looking to, find an easy out to ghost your social circle.
That was Confounding Conundrum, right?
Yeah.
Once again,
that one I can understand a bit more, but this one is just like, I can't hate it, but I don't, like, I feel upset talking about it for so much.
I like a lot of the words that are on it, but when they all come together, I hate it.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to here. 1 mana instant for a black called Malakir Rebirth. Choose target creature. You lose 2 life. Until end of turn, that creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. And on the other side, a land, Malakir Meyer. It's a black source that enters play tapped. Jer, your thoughts?
People are going to sleep on this card until I play it against them and goozle their removal spells many, many times. And then people are going to start getting me with the card, and I'm going to be frustrated that I started playing it in the first place.
What deck do you want a single black combat trick?
Lots, especially ones that combat trick that can be played as a land. Like I could see playing this in like a Grixis Tempo deck. I could see playing this in Black Green Rock. I could see playing this in the myriad of Black X mid-range decks I play. I could see playing it in aggro. Yeah, you can play this in like basically everything short of control and combat.
I mean, targeting a Snapcaster Mage, if you're in like a blue-black control deck or like a low curve-ish control deck, not quite tempo, not quite like basically if you had a blue-black tempo deck and then you just got a whole bunch of cards from 2020 and 2019 dropped on you, so naturally you've had to like make your curve a bit thicker. I could see playing this card, honestly. Like, you just like throw a Snapcaster Mage under the bust, cast this, and get to flashback something nice, or Seagate Stormcaller with this. And yeah, I don't know. It's like, it's a 1-mana spell that is always kind of like decks. It's a relevant card. It's a relevant effect. Some decks will love it, but at the end of the day, it's so cheap and also just like a land if you need it that I could see it popping up in places that you're like, what are you doing here? And then you die.
You're like, oh, all right. Well, that's what you're doing here. You're here to kill me. Love it. Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on to a very exciting new card here. Nighthawk Scavenger. Our friend the vampire has grown up a bit here. 3 mana gets you a 1+X 3 vampire rogue for 1, a black and a black. Has flying, death touch, lifelink. Seems familiar. And then its power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types amongst cards in your opponent's graveyard. What do you think of Nighthawk Goif Rogue? We have to workshop this.
What? I'm sure there's a clever name out there for this card. Usually I'm pretty suspect anytime cards have their like power and toughness fluctuated by a resource that your opponent can, and in this format regularly has control over. But the whole, the nice little 1+ star.
Why?
It's just so funny to see it.
I understand why, but
yeah.
Why?
I think this card's pretty good.
I think this card's really good.
It doesn't have the Goif thing though of counting your own library, which makes it slightly less good.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying, is that like that is a downside because it's tracked based on the resources opponents control, but because of that 1+, it will always exist as a real pain in the ass.
And it's regularly going to be a 5/3 flying death touch lifelinker, which I don't know how often you've played against those, but they're real hard to beat. If your plan is to like reduce your opponent's life.
Yeah, you didn't really need a reason to like lightning bolt more, but it certainly is helpful for getting rid of this kind of card. Like this card's it's pretty good. It's got a lot of words on it.
They're all good.
Can we think of like a mid-range black deck that this isn't just an auto include in?
No.
Well, maybe if you're like a white black, like a
I was going to say the starting 1 power isn't a downside. Like you're not like, I need this to reliably be a 3/3 at all times.
I think the worst part of this card is the black pips. And when I say worst, I just mean if you are like a thicker Death and Taxes variant that just like has a minimal black splash.
Like you're not wrong. That is the worst part of the card. But it's not that bad.
The worst part is that, or like, I guess the worst part might be that like somebody could play an Olivia Voldaren and immediately steal this because it's a vampire. Like, yeah.
All right. Cool. Let's talk about Null, Priest of Oblivion. 2 mana, 2/1 vampire cleric for 1 and a black. Kicker, 3 and a black, has menace and lifelink. Wow, just all the keywords here. And when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Wheeler.
All right, I lied. Well, no, maybe I didn't lie. I think I may have called Seagate Stormcaller one of my favorites. This might actually be my favorite, if not the second favorite.
Since Seagate Stormcaller was the best.
Yeah, it's the best for sure. This card is very good, extremely good. And it just, oh my God, like... So black, anytime black gets lifelink, cheap lifelink, that's great, right? From both aggressive and defensive perspectives. Menace on a 2-drop, like 2 mana, 2 power menace with an added ability, also very good. Just love to have it. It's even got a relevant creature type, I guess, if you want to jam vamps, which I think has actually enough stuff that deck is totally fine. But then it's got this kicker, which is 4 mana, just like, oh, by the way, zombify. Like, if you cast this, you get to zombify. And I just can't stop thinking about this card with Luris. Cast it.
Oh, God. Oh, no. Oh, God. Oh, why?
Oh, yeah. And
I like it.
Like, in Dredge, this is so good. Like, this is, like, oh, my God. Yeah, this card is so cool.
I'm just thinking of poor Child of Light right now being like, I'm a 2 mana, 2/1 lifelink vampire. And everyone's like, that's it.
I mean, to its credit, Child of Night has won a Magic the Gathering Highlander tournament at Yellow Jacket Comics. It was in a winning deck. This is the first time I'll acknowledge it, only just to say, please get rid of that card and replace it with this absolute powerhouse.
Yeah. Next up, Palaka Predation. 3 mana sorcery for 2 and a black. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a card from it with CMC 3 or greater, they discard it. And then there's another side, Palaka Caverns, black source that enters play tapped. Jer, 3 mana hand attack. What do you think?
I think this card's a little too narrow to see a bunch of play. I think if you do play it, it's not unreasonable. Like if you have a bunch of combo in your meta and you want to jam another hand attack spell, it's pretty reasonable. But I don't think most decks are going to play this.
All right. Scourge of the Skyclaves. 2 mana XX demon for 1 and a black. Has a kicker for 4 and a black. When you cast the spell, if it was kicked, each player loses half their life, rounded up. The Scourge's power and toughness are equal to 20 minus the highest life total amongst players. Wheeler.
Oh, I mean, I'm not going to go full Magic Christmas land with this card because I think that's irresponsible. But I do think that this card is pretty reasonable. Dare I say, in the correct deck, quite good. There are decks that can deal damage to themselves pretty frequently, between Thoughtseizes, fetch lands, your opponent dealing damage. And so playing stuff like this is a thing that you can do because you're probably dealing damage to your opponent and you're also taking damage. If you get up to 7 mana, I guess you can also use this as like a burn spell. No flying is a bit of a bummer. No trample's a bit of a bummer, but it's okay. I think we'll forgive it.
Yeah, they printed Berserk for a reason.
Yeah, and I'm not one to shy away from like a Berserk or a Temur Battle Rage or whatever.
This card with Temur Battle Rage is really interesting. Because it can
Yes.
potentially get bigger mid combat by hitting your opponent.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Where are you playing this card? Like, does it go in, for example, Alex's Black Mold deck, like a loaded ground aggressive deck, or do you need a special self-damage deck to fuel this, like Death Shadow?
Well, I don't think you need that. I think that's a common misconception, is that you need to make a massive amount of changes to your deck to like deal a bunch of damage. I think that it's more this card, and I guess Death Shadow too, is just like you pick, like you could build around them, but I think often they're best if you like take a deck that's already bound to do something like this and then throw it in. Like I would prefer to play this in mono black or black red, where you have, you know, Sulfuric Vortex, Flame Rift, you have more fetches, you have shocks. Probably like you could even play this in like a 3-color black aggro deck again, because you have more shocks, fetches, the new flip lands. So you'll be doing damage to yourself as well as, you know, damage to your opponent, and ideally they're dealing damage. Black green, I mean, you could probably play it in that, but again, like black green typically has access to Tarmogoyf and other cards that gain life, which can be a little like they have defensive tools built into the size of their creatures. So yeah, but I mean, maybe this card's just fine in every aggressive black deck like that, as long as you can deal damage to yourself in some way, which probably can. So
Skyclave Shade, 2 mana, 3/1 for 1 and a black shade, has kicker for 2 and a black, can't block. If it was kicked, enters play with 2+1/+1 counters on it, and landfall. This is the heart of the card right here, is this landfall ability. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if the shade is in your graveyard and it's your turn, you may cast it from your graveyard this turn. Wheeler.
Oh, Serge. This card's really good.
Yeah.
It doesn't die. Keeps coming back. Later on, it's a mana sink thing. Very good. I really like this card.
Does it go in Dredge?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Jer. Yes. Yeah, play this card.
And for all you listeners out there, yes, Does It Go in Dredge is the new Does It Go in Aristocrats.
Arista who? No.
Yeah, you're telling me.
So I just want to get ahead on 2 common questions and interactions about this card. One, if you play a land before it dies, the shade does not come back. The shade has to be in your graveyard in order for the timing to work. The way you want to do it is you want shade to die, then play land and bring it back. It's not like a landfall ability that lasts the whole turn. So you can't play a land, attack with it, have it die, and then be like, well, I've played my land this turn, so landfall is still active. So that doesn't work. What was the second thing I was going to say? Shouldn't have said 2. Now I sound like a fool.
I got one for you.
Go ahead.
Technically, there will be some cards that may reference creatures coming from directly from the graveyard to play, where you are technically casting this.
Prized Amalgam.
Well, Prized Amalgam gets around that by referencing that you both can cast something from the graveyard or bring something back. But there are occasionally, you'll see cards pop up like Flayer the Hatebound, I think is a good...
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Not a good example, but a example. So just keep your eyes peeled for very specific wording involving that.
Thank you. You also reminded me of my second thing. The word cast brought the memory back. This landfall ability doesn't let you cast it at a different time. So Bloodghast in yours parallel, you can like crack a fetch land on your opponent's turn and have it come back. That doesn't work with the shade. It gives you the ability to cast it, but doesn't change the casting restriction. So cracking a fetch land on your opponent's end step doesn't let you cast it from your graveyard at that time. There we go. Those are the 2 rules interactions that I figured people are most likely going to want to know about. All right, let's talk about Taborax, Hope's Demise. 3 mana, 2/2 legendary demon cleric for 2 and a black, has flying, has lifelink as long as it has 5 or more +1/+1 counters on it, and whenever a non-token creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Taborax. If that creature was a cleric, you may draw a card. If you do, lose a life. Jer.
I'm not quite sure how I feel about this card. It's a reasonably costed flyer that's going to get a bit bigger. pretty reasonable in an aggro deck, but it's probably just going to die basically immediately. Overall, I think it's not going to make the cut in too many decks.
I could foresee there are two situations where I could foresee playing this card. One is in Black Mold, like the Golgari aggro deck, mostly in the version where there's some reliance on counters, but like I wouldn't play this in a counter specific deck. But even then, like it dies to shock, which is kind of disappointing. And then two, if I play this in a deck with Juzam Jin, like I'm either
literal demon stompy.
Yeah, like I'm playing Demon Stompy, aka Ride the Demon, like, which is more of a meme than anything. But like, I don't know, like Ancient Stompy into this thing is fine, but you can do much better. So yeah, I think it's very narrowly limited. But again, we'll probably die to this.
And our final black card we're going to talk about today is Thwart the Grave. 6 mana sorcery for 4 black, costs 1 less for each member of your party, and says return target creature card and up to 1 target cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard from your graveyard to the battlefield. Kind of spicy.
I definitely read this wrong at first and thought it was just like, I thought it only returned a cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard. And I was like, why is this a magic card? I'm so confused. I only just read the target creature and so I still don't think it's good, but
no.
Well, now hold on. I'm not. I also don't want to sing too many praises, other than it might just be the best art in the set. Yeah, Wiley Becker just absolutely knocking it out of the park constantly.
It's interesting when you're playing a reanimator deck where you start thinking of how many reanimation effects do I want? How much am I willing to pay for reanimation effects? And what's the worst what's the density you need and what's the worst one you want to play? And where does Thwart the Grave end up on that list, right?
Yeah.
And in a reanimation deck, how many of the targets you typically want to reanimate end up also incidentally being a cleric, rogue, warrior, and or wizard?
I mean, it's not as few as you'd think, but you do have to kind of, like, some of them you might be like, hey, do you know why I included this? It's because it's a wizard, right? But
sure.
Like, Agent of Treachery is a rogue. That's a pretty reasonable one. I do think, like, if this card came out like 4 years ago, maybe it would see a home in Reanimator, in the sense that back when Reanimator decks played like actual factual Merfolk Looter, which is a rogue, or like Thought Courier, which is a wizard, you know, that kind of stuff.
You're like, hey, I get my Snapcaster back. That's kind of nice.
Yeah, but like for now, turns out there's just better things to do. Easier way to put cards in the graveyard.
All right, let's move on to red. And we're going to start off with the, akuma? How do I pronounce this word?
Akuma Matata, dude. It means
the Akuma
no
Matata.
worries.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Wait, what was the boar's name?
Ilharg?
No, not the
Pumbaa.
raised boar. Pumbaa. So we got Pumbaa here. We got the best boy.
No, what? This is a dog.
This isn't Pumbaa.
This is
It's not a pig.
It's the best dog. It's Hot Dog.
It's like one of the hot laughing dopey hyenas.
Hey, don't call my lovely little lad here dopey.
So Akuma Matata the Hellhound is a single red 0/1 elemental dog. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Wheeler.
I don't know. I have this idea that this card is actually just, there's a deck for this card. There's been a lot of murmurs from players that know what they're doing and that will typically poop out really like weird ideas for decks that can just actually just kill people, where you play like Stepling, Sakum Hellhound, like all these cheap landfall creatures, Knight of the Reliquary, and you're like a landfall aggro almost.
I've wanted to build Scapeshift aggro deck for a while.
Yeah, it feels like it has that slot of basically like every like established like Canlander player, like if you pulled the people that have like the top, if you pulled the 10 people that have the most wins in this format lifetime or something, like 7 out of 10 of them would be like, well, I just really want to play landfall aggro. Like for they just really want to play plated Geopede or something like that. So I think there's a spot for that. Being red's a lot better than being like a white one drop. But like I don't know. I don't want to play this in an aggro deck. I think there are just better things to do for a 1-drop. Like just pure aggro. Maybe Gruul could play it, but I don't know. I'd say reserve it for just like that landfall deck. Yeah, we've learned our lesson with step links.
All right, next up, Ardent Electromancer. 3 mana, 3/2 human wizard for 2 and a red. When it enters the battlefield, add a red pip for each creature in your party. Is there a combo application for this? Like is there some way to loop this and bounce this over and over and over? Is this an engine card or is this a trap?
I mean, Priest of Gix and Priest of Urabrask are both clerics. Does that help?
Those are facts.
Like, I mean, I think the answer to Serge's question is technically, yes, there's a combo. Should you do it over like any other kind of like creature based combo, like a Lurin or like food chain combo? No, probably not.
Like, is it a realistic thing to do in this format? No.
But it's there and we've acknowledged it.
Like, it is a reasonable body that sometimes lets you like it does sometimes do like a Burning Tree Emissary impression at 3 mana. But
yeah, like I'm not, again, it just falls, that kind of deck falls into the camp of like, look, I will lose to this. I've died to this kind of thing before. Like I've lost to somebody storming out with Grinning Ignis in Canlander, but that's just what Canlander kind of is. So like if somebody asks like, hey Ben, this combo's like, there's a combo with this card, is this a thing? It's like, the answer is yes. But like
people with Pillapala, okay, I'm no judgment.
Yeah, exactly. Like it can do a thing. People have done it before, but you just have to, as long as you have realistic expectations, then like, sure, go for it. You got it.
Let's talk about Cleansing Wildfire. And Wildfire, this card is not. 2 mana sorcery for 1 and a red. Destroy target land. I wish that's all it said. Its controller may search their library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield, taps, shuffle their library, and draw a card. Go ahead, Jer.
I think this card is really, really good and is not going to see enough play in our format. This is like a free real estate. Please stop complaining about all the lands you're losing to while you're not playing this card in your red decks.
Do you want Burn to play it?
No. But like mid-range decks, control decks,
spell decks,
maybe even combo decks. Yeah, spells decks, obviously. Yeah, it says draw a card and it does a thing. Like
it's worth noting that you can target your own lands if you really want to.
True.
There was like a modern deck that I saw that uses, it was like a Jeskai control deck that uses this card and Flagstones of Trocaire.
Yeah, for landfall.
Yeah. Well, you blow up your Flagstones, you get 2 lands. It ramps you and draws a card.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like
I used to boom bust people with Flagstone, right? That's the baby, right? You're like, oh,
like this card doesn't need to get fancy, and it's just it cantrips and it's easy to cast.
Yeah, this card's really good, and not enough people are gonna play it. They're gonna be like, oh, it's not actually an LD spell.
If you're looking for like a hard lock on a deck to play this, it's not necessarily the best example, but I know that I would love to throw this into the Mardu Monarchy deck. Like, just kind of like, no, I don't want you to have that Academy or that Volrath Stronghold. I'm good, thanks.
Like, to how good I think this is, I would still slam it in Blue Moon, even though it gives them a basic land.
Huh. All right, next up, Fireblade Charger. 1 mana, 1/1 Goblin Warrior. If it's equipped, it has haste, and when it dies, deal damage equal to its power to any target. Wheeler.
Very good Goblin. Goblin Arsonist has not been a Goblin that I've enjoyed playing in Goblins for quite some time now. But this is much better than that, because typically Goblins decks plays Lords. So it's likely that this won't just be a 1/1. It could be a 2/2. Heck, it could be a 3x. And Goblins decks also play Sack Outlets. So you can sacrifice it once it gets larger and after it's done some damage to dome them out.
Sledder, because you can pump it up
Yep.
with all your other goblins, then sack
Yep.
it to Sledder to deal 1,000,000
Yep.
damage. So
Jared, I was really hoping to get some match wins off that. Why'd you, before that became really public knowledge?
it's okay. I didn't tell them the other goblin that can do the same thing as Sledder, so you'll still get him with that one.
Oh, thank God. Yeah. What is that? Goblin Sledder? Oh, no, it's just Mog Raider. Oh, okay, good.
Perfect. We're safe.
How relevant is the first line of text of when it's equipped it has haste?
Not very.
Not really for goblins. It is a warrior, though, and it is like if somebody play, again, like it's a cheap warrior that you could play in warrior tribal or red-white equipment. I mean, that's more your lane than... It's got relevant text for that.
I actually think it's solid in the equipment deck. Because, like,
Yeah, me
you
too.
slap a grafted war gear on this thing,
Yeah.
rumble in,
Nobody wants to block a 4/3.
move the war gear over.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kurtz is pretty good.
I like it. All right, let's move on to King Gizzard and the Fissure Wizard over here. 2 mana, 2/1 Goblin Wizard for 1 and a red. When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Wheeler.
I mostly had it on here because of its name. Not going to lie. There's another 2 mana goblin in this set that's probably better if you're playing actual goblins. But this card's mostly here to represent just like how bad most 2-drops in goblins are. And like this card is actually just reasonable, right? Like even in actual factual goblins, it might be fine.
You could almost play this in Reanimator as well.
Yeah, it's a body. I thought about playing it in Dredge
the 2
too.
power is pretty reasonable.
It's easy to cast.
Like it just trades better than most of the other chungus-y 2 mana things. Like most of the other 2 mana things are 1/1s.
Like this is better than Insolent Neonate for that, I guess. I mean, it doesn't put itself in the graveyard, but we're not doing any bridge from below shenanigans.
All right, next up, Kargan Intimidator. 2 mana, 3/1 human warrior for 1 and a red. Cowards can't block warriors. For a generic mana, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. You can pump it for +1/+1 until end of turn. Target creature becomes a coward until end of turn. Or target warrior gains trample until end of turn. Wheeler.
I think this card's pretty all right. This was admittedly my plug for the like, yes, you can play warrior tribal in our format, but also just like, I don't know. I can't stress enough how much I like it when my opponents are unable to block. Like that's probably one of my favorite things to do with red decks is just like steamed clams or clamor shaman.
I also like attacking for 4 with my 2-drop.
Yeah, that's also very good. Trample, great. Like again, the fact that it's cowards can't block warriors. Red decks also play other warriors. There's a whole bunch of them. The fact that you can give other warriors trample as well. Yeah, all around really solid card.
Next up, we have Kazul's Fury, 3 mana instant for 2 and a red. As an additional cost, sacrifice a creature. Deal damage equal to the sacked creature's power to any target. And on the other side, we have a red source that enters play tapped called Kazul's Cliffs. JR, what do you think?
Ben probably didn't know this when he assigned me the card, but I love flings more than most people, not for any particular reason. So I'm going to try to find a way to play this, but I don't think it's that good.
Honestly, that's why I included it, is because I included this because I figured at some point in time you would play the red-green like lands deck, and you're going to fling like a Primeval Titan.
No, I'm gonna fling Merit Lays at people for style, you know.
Oh baby, would you pay 3 for fling?
Well,
yeah, it's also a land.
Yeah.
All right.
That's a huge part for these cards, right? Is like can't stress it enough. Is just like
you're not actually putting fling in your deck.
Yeah, you're just playing a dual land, except for the colors are red, the mana you need, and red, their blood. After you've murdered them with your Kazul's Fury.
All right, well done. Okay, next up we have Leylined Tyrant, 4 mana, 4/4 dragon for 2 red. Has flying, as dragons often do. Now, weird ability here. You don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end. When it dies, you may pay any amount of red. When you do, it deals that much damage to any target. Jer.
What on earth were they think? Like, this card's obscene. It only costs 4. It has Ancient 2 mana TM. it omnaths for some reason. Yeah, why not? And you're like, oh, all right, at least we can kill it. No, you can't, because then you just die anyways. So like, yeah, they play this, you lose the magic card. I mean, it's not quite that bad, but I think this card is insanely good.
I'm pretty high on this card. I have definitely looked at this card while updating medium red decks and said, I don't think I need this. But
Because it doesn't have haste?
well, no, I mean that like like the tokens version, like the medium red list that I've really been fond of goes more all in on having tokens, like creatures that create additional creatures and really taking advantage of that, and more of a going wide kind of aspect than, and plays less dragons. But every other build, like, just, I don't know, like outside of that, it's just like Mardi Gras, where you just have this dragon going down the street and I'm just like showering it with red mana and being like, oh yeah, dragon, you do you.
Yeah, this goes into like all the monsters builds ever.
4 mana 4/4 flying, totally fine. Like the card, that's just like a reasonable card that kills people, you know? Then it has 2 other lines of text that also say, you're dead.
All right, let's talk about Magmatic Channeler. 2 mana, 1/3 human wizard for 1 and a red. As long as there are 4 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, it becomes a 4/4. Tap, discard a card, exile the top 2 cards from your library, then choose one of them. You may play that card this turn. Jer.
This card is also really, really, really good. I like 2 mana 4/4s. I don't know what about you, but
They're okay. Yeah, thanks for asking.
It fuels its own. It lets you like get through your deck faster, which is something like getting velocity is something a lot of these decks really require. Lets you, like, its ability potentially lets you get 2 spells into your graveyard to fuel its ability, because you can discard a spell and then cast a spell, which will then go into your graveyard. Yeah, this card's great.
You can play lands.
Yeah,
Yep.
that too.
Like, what?
Yep.
That's so cool.
You basically can't whiff.
The fact that the tap ability doesn't have a cost other than tapping, like it's not 1 and tap, right?
It probably should have a cost.
Yeah.
Like if it was red and tap, I'm pretty sure I'd still be saying this card is really good.
I do want to say though that this card can absolutely whiff, but only, I mean, in a deck. I've tried this out in Jund Dredge, and in that deck it's very good. Like, to push how good this card can be, even in that deck, it's because it will be a 2 mana 4/4 that can let you hit additional cards and obviously pitch things that you want in your graveyard. Sometimes you whiff when you hit like Golgari Grave Troll plus, like, I don't know, what the hell did I hit? Ashen Ghoul, I think.
Yeah, things you never want to actually cast. You're like, oh no, now they're in exile, I'm ruined.
But like, that's a situation that doesn't happen often in a deck where it's probably not at its best, and it was still just great.
Love it. All right, let's talk about Morag, Fury of Akum. 6 mana, 6/6 legendary Minotaur Warrior for 4 red. Each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it has attacked this turn, and landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of your combat, untap all creatures you control. Wheeler, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to play this card. That's for sure. I don't think I should play this card. Well, maybe sometimes. Like, it's got, like, it's so cool. Look at its horns. Look at the fact that it kills people.
It's cool, but is it good?
It's also not that hard to go infinite with it.
Like, you can, like, I wouldn't just include this to be like, hey, check out that art. Isn't this card cool? Anyways, how you doing?
Give them the horns. Yeah.
But like, yeah, like, I'm saying this because I can foresee myself killing or dying with this card involved, in the sense that, yeah, it's not difficult to go infinite with this card. And there are pre-existing shells that can look at this and go, yeah, I can cast that. Like, yeah, I can manage that. 6 mana? Oh yeah, that's fine. Like, it does get Karakist, but thankfully a lot of the decks that could play this card, manage it, play Blood Moon or Waste or Strip or ways to deal, or the new spell Cleansing Fire.
Oh.
You could even Cleansing Fire yourself to get more landfall triggers. Yeah, so I don't know, this card, I don't want people that say are fans of big red, or maybe the red green like turbo ramp kind of decks, or if they're decks built around trying to kill with this or something similar to this. I don't want them to look at it and go like, oh, this is just a commander card, because like I think it's worth a bit more of a look-see than just that.
It is worth mentioning there is a tricky timing with this particular one.
Yes.
So you have to, if you want to get the additional attack, you actually have to play the land post combat in the main phase, because it just says it adds 1 to there. It doesn't remember, you know what I mean? It doesn't stack it.
People are going to feel really inclined to, I mean, you try to weed out playing your land, or playing stuff before combat. Lands are at least a little more acceptable, but there are definitely people that default to just like playing their lands and everything post combat.
Yeah, and it also gets tricky on that one because of the untap. This doesn't have vigilance, so if you're not sort of a heads up on your lands, specifically on how do you untap your creatures, it's a little clunky. There's a hoop you have to get through to go through that loop, right?
Yeah, one benefit for this card too is that it doesn't need to attack. Like, sometimes you'll see cards like this where you need this to attack. When this attack creatures that attack get this. But you can just, like, if there's like a death touch creature or whatever, like, and you don't want to throw this under the bus, like, you could just leave him back, let everybody else do his dirty work.
All right, Nahiri's Lithoforming, X, red sorcery. Sack X lands. For each land sacked this way, draw a card. You may play X additional lands this turn. Lands you control enter the battlefield tapped. Jer.
So I think there's 2 potential places you could play this. You could use it as like Scapeshift number 2 in the previously mentioned landfall aggro deck. So you could use it to like try and get a ton of landfall triggers in one turn and kill your opponent that way. But I also want to say that I've been trying to build what's that 1 mana artifact that
Amulet?
Yeah, that one.
Amulet of Vigor?
Thank you.
Oh.
I knew you'd know it. I've been trying to brew with that card for a long time.
Good luck.
Yeah, I know. And this card is very good with Amulet of Vigor. That's all I'm gonna say.
Look, if I could 3-1 with an Amulet of Vigor deck in 2016, you could probably 4-0 with this in 2020, especially with good cards now, instead of like 4 mana 1/1s that don't do anything. I wanted to try this in like a Jeskai, like Academy, like eggs kind of deck, like a face reward sort of deck, because Amulet of Vigor is a 1 mana artifact, so you can find it with Trinket Mage and all that stuff. Puts lands into your graveyard, obviously, to return with face reward and Second Sunrise. Draws you a bunch of cards. That's pretty cool and good. And playing additional lands is also, I mean, kind of welcome, right? Especially if you can do some Zurin Orb shenanigans.
Well, yeah, and especially since you're going to be drawing a million cards that turn, it just turns land draws into sort of live, right?
Yeah, this is like a card begging to be broken.
Yeah.
But I think you need to, in order to do that, you might have to play some weirdo or subpar cards to get there. But it could be done.
I can't see breaking it without Amulet, just because it
No. You could do some really interesting stuff with Crucible of Worlds on this, right? If you're looking for landfall.
But all your lands for the rest of the turn enter the battlefield tapped, right?
Yeah, you're not creating like a weird loop out of it. If you're just talking about value, if you're talking about something, like you're saying, a little bit of extra damage off of Valakut. Now, I realize Scapeshift brings all lands in simultaneously. Lithoforming does not. So you're not going to get that like wombo combo like you do from Scapeshift into Valakut. But if you already have it in play and you're just looking for the ability to sort of like a Crucible Zurin Orb land from the graveyard loop of just play a land over and over and over, you could get some very interesting lines out of this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see it as a finisher so much as a synergy card is where my brain goes.
Yeah. I think I think that
your ideas are cooler. But I'm just saying there are some other lines you could do, some other Like, this goes into a very interesting kit of tools that exists in the
Right.
land package, right?
Yeah, I think what Jared and I are saying is that there's a home for this kind of card that already exists that can do things that are certainly more degenerate than
Yeah.
attacking with Thalia and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But like, I think what Jared and I are doing are trying to be like, okay, we know we can do that. How do we really
Well,
try
let's,
to...
yeah. I just like to acknowledge that before other people are like, but what about this with Crucible? And I like that yours is like yes and, as opposed to being like, no, that's not good. But just to put that
Crucible, we've had enough of that. But what about Amulet of Vigor?
Yeah, just to put that on the table.
Crucible's old news. We got it off the points list like 10 years ago.
I still love my Crucible.
Yeah, we're not slagging you for this, Serge. It's just a weird scenario where you are the most modest one for this effect.
Yeah. All right, let's move on here. Relic Robber, 3 mana 2/2 Goblin Rogue for 2 and a red, has haste. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player creates a 0/1 colorless Goblin Construct artifact creature token. With this creature can't block, and at the beginning of your upkeep, take 1 damage. Wheeler.
Well, I looked at this and my first thought was like, oh, thanks, friend. Like, I don't know. This effect is very good against certain strategies. And it is a goblin. It's easy to cast. It's got Ancient Tomb mana. It's got haste. It's got a lot of good going for it, but I just think in both goblins or medium red, which is what comes to mind, I think there are just better things to play at 3 already. Like your 3-drop slot is already jam-packed. And there are a lot of decks that are just like, oh, okay, I guess my Academy adds more mana. Or I guess I can sacrifice something to make my Carrion Feeder bigger. Or like my Gaia's Cradle.
I like it. It's like, this is a bad sliff, or it's like a fine sliff, unless you're playing against exactly Academy or Aristocrats, in which case this is a tremendous liability.
Yeah, like I feel like someone's going to play this in their first game. They'll hit them, they'll give them a token, and then their opponent will be like, okay, untap, Oko, make this token you gave me a 3/3 now. Or just like, I just think there are too many scenarios.
Put like a Sophie on it or something.
Clamp it. Like they clamp it, right?
Oh, wow.
Like,
Clamp it. So the upside to this card as to why it doesn't get a +1/+1 counter is there is a board state in which you attack with this and then they play a moat or something. At least that token continues to do damage, right? Like there's a world in which there's an upside, but I think that the liability is a little spooky.
Yeah, there's just why for a deck that's already maxed out on really brutal 3-drops, why would I play this, I guess is what I'm saying. Like just for a niche-ish scenario. Yeah, I don't think it makes the cut.
All right. Roiling Vortex, 2 mana enchantment for 1 and a red. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, take 1 damage. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, take 5 damage. Single red, your opponents can't gain life this turn. Wheeler.
I got... So I was... Okay. I was streaming when this card got previewed. I hadn't seen it at all, and I admittedly hammed up my reaction a little bit, but I had genuine frustration when I saw this card.
More or less than Collector Oof.
Oof was more despair. This was more just why. I believe I just screamed why. Like I did the inside out. I did the inside part outside, or the quiet part loud and the loud part quiet. Where I was just like, why? Because I think that first off, I think this card's actually quite good.
Me too.
It's just pinging away is great. Like honestly, Curse of the Pierced Heart, this is kind of akin to how the land spell cards are just like, yeah, you kind of want that effect in some decks, but do I want to really dedicate a card slot to it, right? Where Curse of the Pierced Heart, which is a 2 mana curse enchantment that it just pings the enchanted player every upkeep, kind of is just like, you know what, maybe this recursive damage isn't so bad, right? They can't really interact with it, maybe it's fine. But you wouldn't play that card in a burn deck or a red deck. Whereas this one, you get that effect, but you also just get to absolutely muck my eggs decks. Like you get to storm just like casting spells, like I don't know, even blue decks that just get to cast things for free. Yeah, my mind's lost on what the cards are. Like Goblin Dark Dwellers style effects, you know? And then like can't gain life this turn.
And it's not symmetrical. It's not players can't. It's only your opponents can't, just in case there's some weird...
I mean, it would have been just as good if it was players can't
Oh, yeah.
life this turn.
But there's like a weird niche play around window there, right?
But I just like, that's your modus of, oh God, that's just like what some of these decks can do to like air quote beat the red decks. It's just like, you know, oh God, well, that was a pretty good start from the red deck. I'm going to go up to like 80 from Aetherflux Reservoir or like...
So many hands, you just look at it and you're like, well, this is a really good hand against red. Hope they don't have Vortex. And it's like, well, now there's 2 Vortexes. So it's just like the blue decks recently got second Force, which is like probably not as good, but, you know, still pretty good.
God. Just like Moxen. Like you just keep a Mox draw or something, and they're like land Mox like Vortex.
Pass. All right, let's move on. Next up, we have Shatterskull Charger, 3 mana, 4/3 giant warrior for 1 red. Kicker 2 has trample and haste. If it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. And at the beginning of your end step, if it doesn't have a +1/+1 counter on it, return it to your hand. Wheeler.
The way I've been looking at this is like it's an evoke card, or like instead of kicker, like I look at this card like it actually just cost 5. Like if you want the full body, like you look at this as like a 5 cost, 5 power trample haste creature. That's groovy. But then if you only pay 3, you get to either kill their planeswalker, or if they're within a certain range, it like second rights them. So like, because it returning isn't that spectacular. Like we have Viashinos in the format. Admittedly, not a lot of them have trample. Trample's a pretty big thing, but yeah, like I think this card's good. I don't know if I'm playing it in many, like I'd have to test it out in red decks. Usually my preferred red builds don't have a lot of 3s or 4s. But yeah, this is interesting. Like I can't stop looking at this card as like, oh, it's 3 mana, kill a planeswalker, or if I need to do 4 extra damage to them, I can do 4 extra damage to them. And then otherwise it's just like the actual card is just 5. It's just a dragon. It's a charging Monstrosaur.
It also looks like it's skating.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I never saw that. Wow.
Looks like a hockey player.
That horse, I left the horse there just for scale, just to be like, no, it's a giant.
Yeah. Is this just a nod at Canlander? You got a horse, you got a good Canadian kid out there on the ice, you know, trying his best. He'll come back, you know, he gets on the bench, but he's out there and he's doing.
Yeah, thanks, Wizards.
Yeah.
All right. Shatterskull Smashing, X red sorcery. Deal X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, deal X twice, divided as you choose amongst them instead. And on the other side, we have a land, Shatterskull the Hammer Pass, a red source that enters play tapped unless you pay 3 life. Wheeler.
You know what the worst part about this card is? Like the worst part?
Doesn't go to the dome.
Well, I mean, that's the actual worst. But I mean, like, just looking at this card kind of like by itself, like as printed, is that sometime like you need 2 mountains to sack to Fire Blast. Like that's it. This isn't a mountain. But other than that, I think this card is just kind of free for red decks.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be the most played one of these, I think. This is as close to free real estate as it gets.
Yes, this is oofa doofa. Like, sure, I guess it is admittedly expensive when you're trying to deal with like multiple things, right? You do have to put some mana into it, but who cares? It's free to play, basically, right? Yeah. Again, you don't care about the damage as much because you're red. And even outside of that, like you could theoretically play this in red, blue X decks.
Yeah, like this card is nuts in Scape Shift.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Cool, very cool. All right. Spikefield Hazard, single red instant, deal 1 damage to any target. If a permanent dealt damage this way would die, exile it instead. And on the other side, we have Spikefield Cave, a red source that enters play tapped. Jer.
This card is great. Even goes in burn. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, very good.
Thundering Rebuke, 2 mana sorcery for 1 and a red. Deal 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Jer.
This card is great. Play it over Mizzium Mortar.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the fact that it can hit planeswalkers in the game we play in the year 2020, I think is more relevant than having the sweeper for most decks. Not to say you can't play both. Playing both might be correct. I think Flame Slash is likely still better. Depends a bit on your meta. I'd probably play Flame Slash over this almost every time. But once again, I could see playing both. This card's pretty good though, I think.
I think if you're out there playing like non-blue moon-ish decks, I don't know, like for blue moon, I could maybe see playing Mizzium Mortars still.
I honestly think you'd probably be on both, but
yeah, I think that's the more realistic scenario. 4 damage to a planeswalker doesn't even kill like the really big ones, which is unfortunate. But yeah, aside from that, this card's give us more.
Yeah, please keep tagging on planeswalker. I started saying it like 3 sets, and I've started calling out basically everyone. Just like, please keep tagging planeswalker onto these cards.
I held my tongue because with the black inscription that we covered, where I was like, if this said destroyed a creature or planeswalker 3 CMC or less, phenomenal. But I thought maybe that's too greedy. But you know what?
It's not.
Treat yourself.
It's not. Yeah. Or don't treat yourself, just punish Oko. For the love of God, let me kill Oko.
Please.
Like, I've given up on trying to kill Teferi. It's just never going to happen. But, like, please let me kill Oko.
I'll settle for killing Saheeli.
Sure.
Amazing. All right. Next up, Valakut Awakening. 3 mana instant for 2 and a red. Put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library. Then draw that many cards +1. On the opposite side, we have Valakut Stoneforge. Wow, 2 powerful card names. Yet when added together, as a red source that enters the battlefield tapped. Jer, what do you think?
This card's really, really good. It's a instant speed draw spell. It's like a cantrip at worst, and it could recycle your whole garbage hand if you're like me and tend to keep loose and play looser and deck build the loosest. So,
I'd like to use this card in particular as a acknowledgement of yes, these lands go into Charbelcher, and yes, they're pretty darn good. That's it.
Yeah, this card's really, really good. Goes into a lot of red decks.
Well, speaking of Valakut, let's talk about Valakut Exploration. 3 mana enchantment for 2 and a red. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. I think a lot of people are going to play this wrong. And then at the beginning of your end step, if there are cards exiled with Valakut Exploration, put them into their owner's graveyard, then deal damage to each opponent. Basically equals the number of cards there. I don't know. What are you thinking, Wheeler?
I mean, like this card's kind of busted, right? In the right deck. Like this is
super busted.
This is just kind of like a disgusting, messed up card. Cool.
Yep, sure
cool.
is.
Yeah.
This card is busted in Scapeshift and busted in any deck that could possibly play Fastbond.
Yeah, Fastbond to 1.
This is a better Horn of Greed. This does everything you want Horn of Greed to do, but it's not symmetrical.
And also, like, if that horn was also just like hiding a magma cannon,
if it also killed them, yeah. Like the amount of times I've been going off with lands and had like virtually unlimited landfall triggers, but no way to actually kill my opponent.
Yeah, an engine card and a win con built into one.
Like I have considered playing this in eggs. Like in the red, like a more Jeskai or 4-color, because it's just like it's cheap, it's easy on your mana, early enough it just gives you more cards, but then also when you're like looping, it's just like, oh wait, I just like you don't even have to loop. You could just have it happen a couple of times. You're like, I guess you're dead.
Yeah, I like that card a lot. This is probably my favorite card from the set.
Yeah.
It just opens up so many possibilities. All right, our final card that we want to talk about today is the Wayward Guide Beast. 1 mana 2/2 for a single red beast with trample and haste. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, return a land you control to its owner's hand. So this is sort of a lot of people are comparing it to the new Goblin Guide. But the downside's a lot scarier than making your opponent draw a card if they reveal a land off the top. What do we think? Do you think red decks are going to play this?
No.
Okay, good. I want other people to talk before I make myself look like an idiot when I talk about how much I personally love this card.
All right, perfect. I think this card is no bueno. It's a 1-drop you can't cast on 1. I think if it was Haste Menace, then we might have an interesting discussion. But I think the trample is like largely useless, and this card is not very good.
This card is probably going to lose you as many games as it wins you.
Well, see that. Okay, so I look at this card off through the lens of the type of like the way that I like to build mono red. Like again, this is you talk to 3 different people that have played a handful of mono red, right? They all have different ways of building it, different top end opinions on pump spells, all that jazz.
Number of lands.
Yeah, exactly. And so I look at this and I think, and I look at my curve for my red decks, and shocking literally everyone, I tend to play less lands, more cheap spells.
Gasp.
So this card, I love this card because I don't think that you really like, again, yeah, not playing this on 1 is not, it's bad, actively bad, unless you keep like a Mox +1 land hand, and even then it's not great. But I just look at this as like a supplementary, like as long as it's not your very first creature in a deck of a bajillion 1-drops and 2-drops and pump spells and cheap burn, this card's great. And I think the trample is relevant in the deck like that is bound to have, I think we're at like 5 giant growth like brute force kind of effects. Outside of that, I think this card's poo. Like if you're trying to cast Hazard in your red deck or like more things, then
or like a 3-drop.
Yeah. So there's an old aggro deck that used to be in the format. What was the land tap at any color?
Undiscovered Paradise.
This reminds me of the old Undiscovered Paradise style aggro deck. You're playing Moxen, you're playing Chrome Mox.
5-color 1-drops?
Yeah, 5-color 1-drops. Loves this. Winter Orb loves this. Cool. I'll return a tap land to my hand so I can replay it. Undiscovered Paradise plus Winter Orb used to be sort of like an interesting, like, I'm a genius. I can untap a land and return the other tap land to recast it every turn.
In a deck and another reason why I like it is that in a deck that is going to run fewer lands, but is looking to also, double spell and occasionally have multiple plays, even up to 3. And not necessarily a 3-drop, but 3 mana worth of spells, like being able to, I don't know, Volcanic Hammer or something pre-combat, clear a blocker, smash, return a land, get to play it untapped, and then fire off either another 1-drop, keep up a burn spell, that kind of stuff.
Color 1-drop still good now? Because that deck kind of fell out of favor just as mid-range got stronger, as card quality got better, right? Like, we've talked about that deck having a home in the past. Does it have a home now?
Serge, the last time I played that deck, I thankfully have a time point on that.
Yeah, 2017?
It was 2020. It was in March, I want to say, maybe May. I think over 4 hours of playing an extremely fast deck, like you can get a lot of games in with this. I think I maybe won 2 matches. Yeah, and I mean, that could be a product of a lot of things, but I certainly wasn't having a good time. Like, it's just like, oh God.
So like there is a deck that wants this card, but it needs work. It needs love.
Oh, my apologies. February 26th. Oh God.
Amazing. All right. So any final thoughts on the Guide Beast?
I like it, but anytime somebody says like, no, this is not this should not be played, I understand where they are coming from and agree with them outside of just like really low curve red.
I could see it being good in that deck, but
Yeah, or maybe Boros. Like, I don't know, but it's my I
Eh.
enter this with. Well, no, I mean that deck's mana sucks. So like being able to like maybe reset your lands to cast things.
Yeah,
I don't
you
know.
have
I
like
just don't
one
think.
dual land and you can't play basics because then you
Oh,
can't
yeah.
cast any spells.
Yeah, like that. Hey, that's the reality of Boros, right?
Oh, you don't
Like,
have to tell me. I have the best getting beat by garbage Boros mana story there is. So
I like that you and I are just dunking on Boros while Serge is here, just like slowly rubbing his plateau. Yeah,
I'm trying to make it work.
yeah, by adding Mishra's Workshop too.
Yeah. Just get all the Boros cards out, replace them all with artifacts. You got yourself a solid Boros deck.
Yeah, where's your point spread start? Well, Tolarian Academy, triple mocks.
All right. Let's call it there, friends. So thank you so much for listening to part 2 of our Zendikar Rising set review. We'll be back with part 3, which covers the cards that we missed. And also, speaking of cards that we missed, if you think we missed anything in Red and Black or the previous episodes, please let us know down in the comments below. Reminder, this podcast is brought to you by you with your support over the Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. I've been Serge, joined by Wheeler and Jer. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.